Imagine a country buried under debt. Not manageable debt, not uncomfortable debt, but a level of debt that, according to every economics textbook ever written, should have destroyed the country long ago. We're talking about $10 trillion. To put that in perspective, that's more than the combined GDP of the entire African continent. It's enough money to buy Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon outright, with billions left over. A number so large that if you started counting one number per second today, it would take more than 300,000 years to reach the end. Now here's the real shock. This debt is not 50% of the economy. It's not even 100%. It's 240% of GDP. For every dollar Japan produces in a year, it owes $2.40. By every conventional rule of economics, this country should already be finished. The currency should be collapsing. Inflation should be raging. International creditors should be demanding repayment. The government should be begging the IMF for a bailout. But none of that happened. That country is Japan. And not only has Japan survived, it continues to function remarkably well. Walk through the streets of Tokyo and you'll see one of the cleanest, safest, and most advanced cities in the world. Trains run with legendary precision. If a train is even 20 seconds late, the company issues a formal apology. Crime is so low that people regularly leave their wallets on restaurant tables to save their seats. Unemployment hovers around 0.5%, essentially full employment. The yen remains one of the world's most trusted currencies. Japan has carried this impossible debt load for decades. Not years, decades. No default, no bank runs, no currency collapse, no economic apocalypse. So, how is this possible? Because if you've been paying attention to global economics over the past few decades, you know what happens to countries that get into serious debt trouble. Take Greece, for example. In 2010, Greece's debt crisis exploded into the open. The country owed massive amounts to German and French banks. When international creditors lost confidence, the entire economy collapsed. Unemployment hit 27%. Youth unemployment reached an astounding 58%. Pensions were slashed by 30% or more. Salaries were cut. The economy contracted by 25%, not a recession, but an outright depression. Hundreds of thousands of young Greeks fled the country, desperate to find work anywhere else. The Greek government lost control of its own economic policy and was forced to accept humiliating terms from the troika of international creditors. Or look at Argentina, which holds the dubious distinction of having defaulted on its sovereign debt 9 times in its history. 9 times. The most recent default came in 2020. The Argentine peso has lost virtually all its value over the years. Inflation runs wild, sometimes reaching triple digits annually. People have completely lost faith in their own currency and hoard US dollars instead, keeping them hidden under mattresses or in safety deposit boxes. The country that was once among the 10 richest nations in the world at the start of the 20th century is now struggling to stay afloat, lurching from crisis to crisis. Or Venezuela, where a toxic combination of debt, mismanagement, and reckless money printing created a hyperinflation nightmare. At its peak, Venezuela's inflation rate reached 1,000,000%. 1,000,000%. The government printed so much money that the currency became literally worthless. People used Bolivar notes as napkins because it was cheaper than buying actual napkins. A cup of coffee that cost a few bolivars in 2012 cost millions of bolivars by 2018. Teachers and doctors, once solidly middle class, were reduced to digging through garbage looking for food. These are not abstract cautionary tales. These are real economic disasters that happened in our lifetimes. Countries where people lost everything, where savings evaporated, where the social fabric tore apart. Every economics student learns the same iron law. If you borrow too much money and can't pay it back, your economy collapses. End of story. Except Japan seems to have missed that memo entirely. For over 30 years now, Japan has been running up debt at an astonishing pace. The government consistently spends far more than it takes in through taxes. Every year, the deficit grows. Every year, the debt pile gets bigger. And every year, economists and financial analysts predict that this is finally the year when Japan's luck runs out, when the debt bomb explodes, when the whole house of cards comes tumbling down. And every year, nothing happens. Infrastructure continues to improve. The Shinkansen bullet trains still run at 200 miles per hour with almost perfect safety records. Hospitals function efficiently, pensions are paid on time, schools teach. Public services operate smoothly, life goes on as if the massive debt simply doesn't exist. This isn't just confusing, it's paradigm breaking. It challenges fundamental assumptions about how economies work. It suggests that maybe, just maybe, we don't understand sovereign debt as well as we think we do. Now, to be absolutely clear, this story is not about debt being harmless. I'm not saying Japan's situation is ideal or sustainable forever. I'm not saying debt doesn't matter. What I am saying is that Japan's experience teaches us something profound and often misunderstood about the nature of government debt, about monetary systems, and about why some countries can carry debt loads that would utterly destroy others. Understanding Japan doesn't just explain Japan, it explains the modern global economy. Because here's the thing, Japan isn't alone anymore. The United States now carries over $36 trillion in debt, roughly 120% of GDP and climbing. The UK is over 100% of GDP, France, Italy, Spain, most major European economies are carrying debt levels that would have been considered absolutely catastrophic just a generation ago. So are all these countries on the brink of collapse? Are we heading toward a global debt crisis that will dwarf 2008? Or have the fundamental rules of economics quietly changed in ways that most people, including many economists, don't fully understand? The answer to that question matters. It matters for your savings, your investments, your retirement planning. It matters for whether you should be panicking about inflation, about government spending, about debt levels. It matters for how you think about the economic future, not just for your country, but for yourself and your family. So let's dig into the Japan mystery. Let's understand exactly how a country can owe $10 trillion and not just survive, but actually continue to function normally. And then we'll talk about what this means for the rest of the world, and what it means for you. Because I'm going to tell you right now, the answer is going to surprise you. Some of it will sound like financial magic, some of it will sound like cheating the system, and some of it will sound like a disaster waiting to happen. All of those reactions are, in their own way, correct. The most important question, and how much debt does Japan have? It's who does Japan owe that debt to? And this is where the entire story changes. Approximately 90% of Japan's government debt is owned domestically by Japanese citizens, Japanese banks, Japanese pension funds, Japanese insurance companies, and most importantly, the Bank of Japan itself. Only about 10% is owned by foreign investors. That single difference is everything. Let me explain why with a simple analogy. Imagine your family has a $300,000 mortgage on your house. You owe that money to a bank, an external creditor. That's external debt. The bank can foreclose if you miss payments. The bank can demand its money back. The bank operates by its own rules and interests. Now imagine instead that you borrowed that same $300,000 from your wealthy uncle who lives in the same house with you. Same amount of debt, but a completely different situation. Right. Your uncle isn't going to foreclose on you. He's not going to demand immediate repayment. He has every incentive to keep the family and the household stable because he lives there too. His fate is tied to yours. This is essentially Japan's situation. The debt is owed internally, within the Japanese economic system. It circulates within a closed loop. Japanese banks hold government bonds. When those bonds mature, the government pays the banks back, and the banks often use that money to buy new government bonds. Japanese pension funds hold government bonds to generate returns for retirees. When they pay out pensions, they're paying Japanese citizens, who often save that money by buying more government bonds. Money flows in a circle within the system. Japan isn't beholden to foreign creditors who might suddenly panic and demand their money back. There's no risk of capital flight, where foreign investors lose confidence and pull their money out en masse, crashing the economy in the process. Compare this to Greece. When Greece got into debt trouble, it owed massive amounts to German banks, French banks, and other foreign creditors. Those foreign creditors had no particular loyalty to Greece. When they got nervous about being repaid, they could, and did, demand austerity measures, structural reforms, and steep spending cuts. Greece had no choice but to comply because the money was external. Foreign creditors could simply refuse to lend more, and then Greece would be finished. Japan's debt stays at home, and that makes all the difference. Currency sovereignty. The ultimate advantage here is the second critical factor. Japan borrows in yen, a currency it fully controls. This might sound like a minor technical detail, but it's actually the difference between life and death for an economy. A country that borrows in its own currency cannot technically go bankrupt. It can always create more of that currency to meet its debt obligations. Now, before you say wait, isn't that just printing money? Doesn't that cause inflation? Yes, it can, and we'll address that concern in a moment. But first, understand the fundamental power this represents. Japan owes money in yen. Japan controls the creation of yen. Therefore, Japan can always make its debt payments, always. The question isn't whether Japan can pay its debts. The question is whether those payments will be worth anything. Greece didn't have this option. Greece used the euro, which is controlled by the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. When Greece ran into trouble, it couldn't simply print more euros. It had to actually find euros to pay its debts, and when it couldn't, it defaulted and had to be bailed out. Argentina has repeatedly made the catastrophic mistake of borrowing in US dollars, a currency it doesn't control. When Argentina couldn't get enough dollars to meet its obligations, it defaulted. Over and over again throughout its history, but Japan can always print yen. The Japanese government will never miss a payment on its bonds, ever, not because the government is particularly virtuous or well managed, but because it has a printing press. And every investor in the world knows this. That's why Japanese government bonds are still considered among the safest assets in the world. Despite the massive debt load, the risk of outright default is essentially zero. The real risk, the one we'll discuss later, is that the yen itself loses value. But that's a different problem from default. Zero interest rates. The silent weapon. Japan has maintained interest rates near zero for more than 2 decades. Sometimes even below zero. This completely transforms the debt equation. Think about it. If you owe $10 trillion and the interest rate is 0.1%, your annual interest payment is only about $10 billion. That's manageable, even for a government running deficits. But if interest rates were 5%, your annual interest payment would be $500 billion. That's a completely different, and potentially catastrophic, situation. Japan's ultra-low interest rates mean that even as the absolute debt pile grows larger and larger, the cost of servicing that debt remains manageable. The government can keep borrowing, keep spending, and the burden doesn't crush the economy because they're barely paying any interest. How does Japan maintain such low rates? Partly through Bank of Japan policy, but also because of the next factor. A nation of savers. Japanese culture has long emphasized saving over spending. This isn't just a matter of individual preference, it's deeply embedded in Japanese society. There's a cultural value placed on security, on being prepared, on having a financial cushion for emergencies. This manifests in one of the highest household savings rates in the developed world. Even when incomes are relatively modest, Japanese families prioritize saving. They're not out buying the latest gadgets or taking expensive vacations. They're putting money away. But here's the question, where does all that saved money go? It needs a safe place to sit, and in Japan, the safest place has traditionally been government bonds. Even though the return is minuscule, sometimes literally zero or even negative in real terms after accounting for inflation, people buy them because they trust the government, they want security, and culturally, it's simply what you do. This creates an enormous, reliable pool of domestic capital that the government can tap into. Japan doesn't need to attract foreign investors by offering high interest rates. It has a captive domestic market that will buy bonds at almost any rate, just to have a safe place for their savings. It's a uniquely Japanese advantage that most other countries simply don't have, the Bank of Japan's high-risk strategy. And finally, we come to the most controversial element of Japan's debt survival, the role of the central bank. The Bank of Japan has been buying government bonds on a massive scale for years. This practice is called quantitative easing if you want to use the polite term, or printing money if you want to be blunt about it. Here's how it works. The Bank of Japan creates new yen out of thin air, literally, thus adding zeros to a digital account and uses those newly created yen to buy government bonds from banks and other institutions. This serves multiple purposes simultaneously. It keeps interest rates artificially low, it provides virtually unlimited demand for government debt, and it injects money into the financial system. The result? The Bank of Japan now owns roughly half of all Japanese government bonds. Think about what this actually means. The Japanese government owes about half its debt to the Bank of Japan, which is essentially part of the same government. It's like owing money to yourself. You can't go bankrupt owing money to yourself. But this isn't some magical free lunch. It's a delicate, high-wire balancing act that works until it doesn't. Japan has not discovered some secret formula for infinite debt. It has not repealed the laws of economics. What it has done is build a system that works under very specific conditions, conditions that could change at any moment. Because everything, absolutely everything, rests on a single fragile foundation: trust, trust in the yen, trust in government bonds, trust in the Bank of Japan, trust in the system itself. If that trust breaks, the consequences could be catastrophic. Here's the nightmare scenario. Imagine Japanese citizens and institutions suddenly decide that government bonds aren't safe anymore. Maybe they've watched the debt grow too large. Maybe they've seen the Bank of Japan's balance sheet balloon to absurd levels. Maybe a political crisis shakes confidence. Whatever the trigger, they start selling their bonds. When everyone tries to sell at once, bond prices plummet. When bond prices fall, interest rates spike. That's just how bonds work. If interest rates suddenly jump from 0.1% to even 3%, Japan's debt servicing costs would explode overnight. The government would have to choose between defaulting, slashing spending dramatically, or having the Bank of Japan print even more money. If they choose more money printing, inflation surges, the yen weakens. Imports become expensive, a huge problem for a country that imports most of its energy and food. Prices skyrocket. People panic. They try to convert their yen into other currencies or assets. The yen collapses further. This is how trust death spirals work. Each problem makes the next problem worse, and before you know it, you're in a full-blown currency crisis. Sound far-fetched? It's happened before. It happened to Greece. It happened to Argentina. It happened to Turkey. It happened to Venezuela. There's no law of physics that says it can't happen to Japan. And then there's the demographic crisis. Japan has one of the oldest populations in the world and one of the lowest birth rates. Every year, there are fewer working-age people supporting more and more retirees. What does this mean for the debt situation? Fewer workers means lower tax revenues. More retirees means higher government spending on pensions and healthcare. The deficit grows even if nothing else changes. But there's another problem. Those legendary Japanese savers, they're getting old. Eventually, they'll need to start withdrawing their savings to live on. They'll need to sell their government bonds to fund their retirements. Who's going to buy those bonds? The younger generation is much smaller. They won't have the savings capacity that their parents' generation had. This is a ticking time bomb, and no one has a good answer for how to defuse it. So, what can we learn from Japan's High Wire Act? First, who you owe matters just as much as how much you owe. Debt to your family is very different from debt to a predatory lender. If you must take on debt, think carefully about your creditor. Second, control over your system matters. Having multiple income streams, diverse skills, and options gives you resilience. Don't be dependent on any single source. Third, trust is everything. Your credit score, your reputation, your relationships, these take years to build and seconds to destroy. Maintain them carefully. Fourth, what works for governments doesn't work for individuals. Japan can do things you can't. Don't assume government strategies translate to personal finance. Fifth, nothing lasts forever. Japan has defied gravity for 30 years. But that doesn't mean it will defy it forever. In your own life, plan for change. Japan's $10 trillion debt is one of the most fascinating economic experiments in modern history. It has proven that conventional wisdom about sovereign debt is absolute. A country can carry enormous debt loads without collapsing if conditions are right. But it's also a warning. Japan's system works right up until the moment it doesn't, and when complex financial systems fail, they tend to fail suddenly and catastrophically. The real lesson isn't that debt doesn't matter. It's that debt is more complicated than simple rules suggest. Context matters. Structure matters. Trust matters most of all. Japan hasn't collapsed. The most important word in that sentence is yet.